Hello and welcome to The Dreamy Physicist. I'm so glad you're here tonight, settling into that quiet corner where curiosity meets calm, where the mysteries of the universe unfold gently, like a bedtime story written in starlight. Whether you're curled up under blankets or simply letting the day fade into the background, you've found the perfect place to drift into wonder. Tonight, we're embarking on a journey to the edge of the known, to a story that's unfolding right now in the cold darkness between worlds. It's about something approaching Mars, something that has scientists whispering in hushed tones and rewriting their assumptions about what might be out there. This is the story of 3I/Atlas, an object so strange, so unprecedented, that it's forcing us to question everything we thought we knew about visitors from beyond our solar system. Before we begin this gentle voyage into the cosmic unknown, if you find comfort in these quiet explorations of science and space, I'd be ever so grateful if you tapped that like button or subscribed to join our little community of midnight stargazers. And to those of you listening from around the world, I'd love to know where you are tonight and what draws you to these celestial mysteries. Now, I do hope this story isn't so fascinating that it keeps you awake, but if it does, at least you'll drift off having learned something extraordinary about the universe we call home. So let's begin our quiet journey into the mystery of 3I/Atlas, the alien object that's changing everything we thought we knew about interstellar visitors. Picture this. It's a clear night in late 2019, and astronomers at observatories around the world are going about their usual work, scanning the heavens, cataloging the familiar dance of planets and asteroids. The cosmos seems predictable, orderly, following the same gravitational choreography it has performed for billions of years. But then something appears in their telescopes that doesn't belong, something that makes them pause and look again, wondering if their instruments are playing tricks on them. What they discovered was an object moving through our solar system in a way that defied easy explanation. Unlike the countless asteroids and comets that orbit our sun in predictable ellipses, this visitor was following a hyperbolic trajectory, a path that spoke of origins far beyond our solar neighborhood. It had come from somewhere else entirely, from the vast emptiness between the stars, and it was moving with purpose toward Mars. The object was designated 3I/Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar visitor to our solar system, following the mysterious Oumuamua in 2017 and comet 2I/Borisov in 2019. But Atlas was different from its predecessors in ways that made astronomers lean forward in their chairs and furrow their brows in concentration. This wasn't just another piece of cosmic debris wandering through our celestial backyard. This was something that challenged our understanding of what interstellar objects should look like and how they should behave. At first glance, Atlas appeared unremarkable enough. Telescopic observations revealed what seemed to be a dark, elongated object, roughly 200 meters in length, tumbling slowly through space. Its surface was darker than charcoal, reflecting less than 4% of the sunlight that touched it. In the grand theater of space, it was like a shadow against shadows, visible only because of the faint starlight it occasionally blocked as it spun. But as astronomers continued their observations, gathering data night after night, a picture began to emerge that was anything but ordinary. The object's rotation was peculiar, not the chaotic tumble one might expect from a piece of interstellar debris, but something more ordered, more deliberate. It was rotating with a period of exactly 7.3 hours, a rhythm so precise it seemed almost artificial. Even more intriguing was its trajectory. Computer models tracking its path showed that Atlas wasn't simply falling toward the sun under the influence of our star's gravity. Instead, it was following a course that would take it on a close approach to Mars, coming within just 50,000 kilometers of the red planet's surface. For an interstellar object to arrive at our solar system and immediately target one of our planets seemed like an astronomical coincidence of staggering proportions. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a planetary scientist at the European Southern Observatory, was among the first to recognize that something extraordinary was happening. As she watched the data stream in from telescopes around the world, she felt a familiar thrill of discovery mixed with something she'd never experienced before, a quiet unease that crept up her spine as the implications of what she was seeing began to sink in. The spectroscopic analysis of Atlas revealed another puzzle. Unlike typical asteroids, which show clear signatures of rock and metal, or comets, which display the telltale signs of ice and organic compounds, Atlas seemed to be made of something else entirely. The spectrum was flat, almost featureless, as if the object were composed of materials that absorbed light across all wavelengths equally. It was like looking at a perfect black body, something that existed more in physics textbooks than in the real universe. As word of the discovery spread through the astronomical community, theories began to multiply like stars in a clear night sky. Some suggested that Atlas might be a fragment of a destroyed planet from another star system, a piece of an alien world that had wandered the galaxy for millions of years before stumbling into our cosmic neighborhood. Others proposed that it could be a new type of interstellar object, perhaps a dark comet with all its volatile materials, long since sublimated away by the harsh radiation of deep space. But there were other possibilities that astronomers discussed only in whispered conversations over late night coffee in observatory break rooms. The object's unusual properties, its precise rotation, its targeted trajectory toward Mars, all suggested something that science had long speculated about but never encountered. Could Atlas be artificial? Could it be evidence of intelligence from beyond our solar system? The very question sent ripples of excitement and apprehension through the scientific community. For decades, astronomers had searched the skies for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence, pointing radio telescopes toward distant stars and listening for signals that might indicate the presence of alien civilizations. But they had always assumed that first contact, if it came at all, would arrive as electromagnetic waves carrying encoded messages across the vastness of space. No one had seriously considered that our first encounter with alien technology might come in the form of a dark object tumbling silently through our solar system, announcing its presence only through the subtle gravitational perturbations it created as it passed near our planets. Yet here was Atlas, defying conventional expectations and forcing scientists to confront possibilities they had only imagined in the realm of science fiction. The timing of Atlas's arrival added another layer of mystery to an already perplexing situation. Detailed orbital calculations revealed that the object had been traveling through interstellar space for approximately 45,000 years, journeying from a point somewhere in the direction of the constellation Lyra. This meant that Atlas had begun its voyage long before human civilization had developed writing, before our ancestors had even learned to work with metals or build permanent settlements. For 45 millennia, while humans evolved from primitive hunter gatherers into a spacefaring species, Atlas had been crossing the cold emptiness between stars, maintaining its course with unwavering determination. The thought was both humbling and unsettling. What could have set such an object on its path so long ago? And why, after such an epic journey, was it now approaching Mars with what appeared to be deliberate intent? Dr. Marcus Chen, a specialist in orbital mechanics at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, spent sleepless nights running simulation after simulation, trying to understand the forces that might have shaped Atlas's trajectory. His models showed that the object's path was almost impossibly precise, threading through the gravitational influences of nearby stars with the accuracy that seemed to defy random chance. The more Chen studied the data, the more convinced he became that Atlas's journey was no accident. Someone or something had aimed this object at our solar system with extraordinary precision, accounting for the gravitational effects of stars that wouldn't even be in the same positions when Atlas finally reached its destination. It was a feat of celestial navigation that spoke of intelligence and technology far beyond anything humanity had achieved. As Atlas continued its approach toward Mars, observatories around the world focused their instruments on the mysterious visitor, gathering every photon of reflected light they could capture. High resolution images began to reveal details that only deepened the mystery. The object's surface wasn't uniformly smooth, as initially thought, but showed subtle variations in texture and reflectivity that suggested a complex internal structure. Most intriguing of all were what appeared to be geometric patterns etched into Atlas's surface, faint lines and angles that were barely visible at the limits of telescopic resolution. These markings didn't look like the random cratering and erosion that would be expected on a natural object that had spent 45,000 years traveling through interstellar space. Instead, they resembled something far more deliberate, as if the object had been designed and constructed rather than simply formed by natural processes. The scientific community found itself walking a tightrope between skepticism and wonder. The evidence was mounting that Atlas might be something unprecedented in human experience, but the implications were so profound that many researchers hesitated to voice their suspicions publicly. After all, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the possibility that humanity was about to encounter its first confirmed example of extraterrestrial technology was perhaps the most extraordinary claim imaginable. Yet as Atlas drew closer to Mars, approaching its target with the relentless precision of a guided missile, it became increasingly difficult to ignore the mounting evidence that this was no ordinary interstellar visitor. The object was maintaining its course despite the gravitational perturbations it encountered as it passed through the outer reaches of our solar system, suggesting some form of active guidance system that could make minute corrections to its trajectory. And so, as we settle into this quiet exploration of one of the most profound mysteries of our time, we find ourselves at the threshold of a discovery that could change everything we think we know about our place in the universe. Atlas continues its patient approach toward Mars, carrying with it secrets that have been preserved in the cold darkness of space for longer than human civilization has existed. What will we find when this enigmatic visitor finally reaches its destination? What purpose drives an object that has traveled for 45,000 years to arrive at this precise moment in our history? These are the questions that keep astronomers awake at night, staring at their data and wondering if they're witnessing humanity's first contact with intelligence from beyond the stars. As the weeks passed and Atlas drew ever closer to Mars, something unprecedented began to happen in the quiet corridors of observatories and research institutions around the world. Scientists who had spent their careers studying the predictable motions of familiar celestial bodies found themselves confronted with data that seemed to whisper of possibilities they had only dared to imagine in their most speculative moments. The object's behavior was becoming more peculiar with each passing day. Unlike typical interstellar visitors, which gradually slow down as they fall deeper into our sun's gravitational well, Atlas was maintaining a remarkably consistent velocity. This wasn't simply unusual, it was physically puzzling. Natural objects, following ballistic trajectories, don't maintain constant speeds as they navigate the complex gravitational landscape of our solar system. Dr. Sarah Kim, a theoretical physicist at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, was among the first to notice the anomaly. As she pored over the tracking data late one evening, her coffee growing cold as the hours slipped by, she realized that Atlas was exhibiting what could only be described as powered flight. The subtle accelerations and decelerations required to maintain its precise trajectory suggested the presence of some form of propulsion system, though no conventional rocket exhaust or ion drive signature had been detected. The implications sent a quiet shiver through the scientific community. If Atlas was indeed under some form of active control, then humanity was witnessing something that challenged the very foundations of our understanding about life in the universe. This wasn't the gradual accumulation of evidence for extraterrestrial intelligence that astronomers had long anticipated. This was something far more immediate and tangible, an artifact from another world that had arrived at our cosmic doorstep. As news of the discovery began to leak beyond the tight circle of professional astronomers, the response was swift and dramatic. Government agencies that had previously shown only polite interest in space exploration suddenly found themselves deeply invested in tracking Atlas's progress. The object had transformed overnight from a scientific curiosity into a matter of potential national security. Deep Space Network installations around the globe were quietly redirected to focus their massive radio dishes on the approaching visitor. If Atlas was indeed an artificial construct, there was a chance it might be transmitting some form of signal, perhaps a message intended for any intelligent species it might encounter. The radio telescopes listened with electronic ears, more sensitive than anything humanity had ever constructed, straining to detect even the faintest whisper of communication from the dark object. What they found was silence. Not the comfortable silence of empty space, but something more profound and unsettling. Atlas appeared to be absorbing radio waves across all frequencies, creating what researchers began calling a radio shadow as it moved through space. This wasn't the behavior of a typical rocky or metallic object, which would reflect or scatter electromagnetic radiation in predictable patterns. Instead, Atlas seemed designed to minimize its electromagnetic signature, as if it were deliberately trying to avoid detection. The object's stealth characteristics became more apparent as it approached the orbit of Mars. Military tracking systems that routinely monitored space debris and potential threats found Atlas surprisingly difficult to maintain consistent contact with. Still, the object seemed to fade in and out of detection, not because of technical failures or atmospheric interference, but because of some inherent property that made it nearly invisible to conventional sensors. Dr. James Harrison, a materials scientist who had been brought in to analyze the spectroscopic data, found himself staring at readings that challenged everything he thought he knew about matter and energy. The surface of Atlas wasn't simply dark, it was what he could only describe as aggressively non reflective. The materials seemed to trap photons rather than bouncing them back toward Earth, creating an effect that was both fascinating and deeply unnerving. Laboratory attempts to recreate similar optical properties had yielded only limited success. The closest human technology could come to matching Atlas's light absorbing characteristics was through the use of carbon nanotube arrays and metamaterials that existed only in experimental form. The idea that such advanced materials might occur naturally was virtually impossible. Someone had engineered Atlas with a sophistication that surpassed humanity's current technological capabilities by decades or perhaps centuries. Meanwhile, the object continued its methodical approach toward Mars, now less than 3 weeks away from its closest encounter with the red planet. Orbital calculations showed that Atlas would pass within 50,000 kilometers of Mars's surface, close enough to be clearly visible to the various robotic explorers humanity had stationed around and on the planet. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, Curiosity rover, and other robotic assets were hastily reprogrammed to focus their instruments on the approaching visitor. If Atlas was indeed an artificial construct, this would represent humanity's best opportunity to gather detailed information about its structure, composition, and possible purpose. Every available camera, spectrometer, and sensor was prepared for what might be the most important scientific observation in human history. As the encounter date approached, something extraordinary began to happen. Atlas, which had maintained its dark, nearly invisible profile throughout its journey, started to exhibit faint emissions across multiple wavelengths. These weren't the random thermal signatures one might expect from an object warmed by solar radiation. Instead, they appeared to be organized, structured, almost like a complex pattern of lights activating across the visitor's surface. The emissions were subtle, barely detectable even with humanity's most sensitive instruments, but they were undeniably there. Spectral analysis revealed that the light was being generated through processes that didn't match any known natural phenomenon. The wavelengths were too precise, too organized, too purposeful to be explained by conventional physics. Dr. Rodriguez found herself at the center of a storm of scientific excitement and governmental concern. Her initial observations of Atlas had evolved into something that was capturing the attention of world leaders and forcing humanity to confront questions it had never seriously considered. Were we alone in the universe? And if not, what did the arrival of Atlas mean for our species and our planet? The object's trajectory would take it past Mars and then continue deeper into the solar system, eventually swinging around the sun before heading back toward interstellar space. But there were troubling indications that Atlas might not be content to simply observe Mars from a distance. Minute changes in its trajectory suggested that the object was making subtle course corrections, adjustments that would bring it even closer to the red planet than originally calculated. These trajectory modifications were impossible to explain through natural forces. The gravitational influence of Mars wasn't sufficient to account for the changes, and there was no evidence of outgassing or other comet like behavior that might alter Atlas's path. The object was actively steering itself, making deliberate choices about its route through our solar system. Sleep became elusive for the astronomers and physicists tracking Atlas's progress. Each new observation brought fresh mysteries and deeper questions about the nature of their visitor. The object's behavior patterns seemed almost biological in their complexity, as if it were responding to stimuli and making decisions based on information it was gathering about our solar system. Radio observatories detected brief, intermittent transmissions emanating from the direction of Atlas, but the signals were unlike anything in humanity's experience. They weren't the simple mathematical progressions that scientists had long theorized might characterize communications from an alien intelligence. Instead, they were complex, layered, almost musical in their structure, suggesting a form of information encoding that operated on principles entirely foreign to human understanding. The approaching encounter with Mars had transformed from a scientific observation into something approaching a first contact scenario. Governments around the world were quietly convening emergency sessions, trying to prepare for possibilities that had previously existed only in the realm of science fiction. What protocols existed for communicating with an extraterrestrial artifact? How should humanity respond to a visitor that had traveled 45,000 years to reach our solar system? Atlas continued its patient approach, now close enough to Mars that ground-based telescopes could begin to resolve surface details. The geometric patterns that had been barely visible from Earth were becoming clearer, revealing what appeared to be a complex network of interconnected structures covering much of the object's surface. These weren't the random impacts of micrometeorites or the erosion patterns of natural weathering. They looked designed, purposeful, almost like circuit boards or neural networks etched into the visitor's dark exterior. And as Atlas drew within the final days of its encounter with Mars, humanity held its breath, wondering what revelations awaited when this enigmatic traveler from the stars finally revealed its secrets to our waiting instruments and anxious eyes. The red planet had never seemed so vulnerable. As Atlas entered the final phase of its approach, something began happening that sent ripples of concern through mission control centers across 3 continents. The object wasn't simply passing by Mars as predicted, it was slowing down. This deceleration wasn't subtle or gradual, it was deliberate, controlled, unmistakable. Atlas was bleeding velocity in a way that defied every model of interstellar object behavior that astronomers had ever developed. Natural objects don't apply brakes as they approach planetary bodies. They don't make calculated decisions about their speed and trajectory. Yet here was Atlas, demonstrating a level of autonomous control that spoke of intelligence and purpose. Dr. Chen stared at his computer screen in the pre dawn darkness of his laboratory, watching trajectory plots update in real time as data streamed in from observatories around the globe. The numbers told a story that made his hands tremble slightly as he reached for his coffee. Atlas was positioning itself for orbital insertion around Mars. It was preparing to become, at least temporarily, an artificial moon of the red planet. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a flyby or a brief encounter. Atlas intended to stay, to establish some form of presence in Martian space. For the first time since its discovery, the object was revealing not just its artificial nature, but its purpose. It had come to study Mars, perhaps to study us. Meanwhile, on the surface of Mars, humanity's robotic ambassadors were experiencing their own strange encounters with the approaching visitor. The Perseverance rover, methodically collecting samples in Jezero crater, began reporting unusual electromagnetic anomalies. Its instruments detected brief pulses of energy that seemed to emanate from somewhere high above, as if Atlas were conducting its own reconnaissance of the planet below. The Ingenuity helicopter, humanity's first aircraft to fly on another world, captured images that would puzzle researchers for months to come. As it performed its routine aerial surveys, its cameras recorded fleeting shadows moving across the Martian landscape, shadows that didn't correspond to any known atmospheric phenomena or surface features. These dark shapes seemed to race across the rusty terrain with purposeful motion, as if Atlas were deploying smaller reconnaissance probes to gather information about the planet's surface. Dr. Lisa Park, a xenobiologist at the SETI Institute, found herself thrust into a role she had never expected to play. For years, she had studied the potential for life beyond Earth, developing protocols for how humanity might recognize and interact with alien biology. Now she was being asked to consider something far more immediate and complex: how to interpret the behavior of what appeared to be an artificial intelligence from another star system. The patterns emerging from Atlas's activities suggested a methodical, scientific approach to planetary exploration. The object was conducting systematic scans of Mars's atmosphere, magnetic field, and surface composition. Its emissions followed a structured sequence that reminded Park of the way human spacecraft gathered data during orbital surveys. But there were differences, subtle variations in methodology that hinted at a fundamentally different approach to scientific observation. Atlas seemed particularly interested in regions of Mars where water had once flowed. The ancient river valleys and dried lake beds that told the story of the planet's wetter past drew repeated attention from the visitor's sensors. Long duration observations focused on areas where NASA's rovers had discovered evidence of past habitability, as if Atlas were searching for clues about whether Mars had ever harbored life. This selective attention to astrobiologically significant sites sent a chill through the scientific community. It suggested that Atlas possessed knowledge of planetary evolution and the conditions necessary for life. The object wasn't conducting a random survey. It was looking for something specific, something that indicated intelligence behind its design and mission. The mystery deepened when Atlas began transmitting structured signals toward Earth. These weren't the chaotic emissions that had been detected earlier. They were organized, repetitive, almost like a calling card announcing the visitor's presence. Radio astronomers working around the clock to decode these transmissions found themselves confronted with a communication system that operated on principles unlike anything in human experience. The signals contained mathematical relationships that were hauntingly familiar yet subtly alien. Prime number sequences appeared alongside geometric progressions that seemed to reference fundamental physical constants, but with variations that suggested the transmitter operated from a different understanding of universal laws. It was as if Atlas were speaking in a dialect of mathematics that humanity could partially comprehend but not fully interpret. Dr. Harrison's materials analysis team made another breakthrough that added to the growing evidence of Atlas's artificial origin. Detailed spectroscopic examination revealed that the object's surface contained isotopic ratios that didn't match any known solar system materials. The elements were familiar: carbon, silicon, various metals, but their nuclear signatures suggested formation in a stellar environment completely different from our own. More intriguingly, some of these materials appeared to be artificially enriched, showing isotopic concentrations that could only result from advanced nuclear processing. Atlas wasn't just built from exotic materials. It was constructed using techniques that demonstrated mastery over atomic structure at a level humanity was only beginning to achieve in laboratory settings. The visitor's power source remained a complete mystery. Despite intensive observation, no conventional energy signatures had been detected. Atlas seemed to operate without generating waste heat, without consuming fuel, without exhibiting any of the thermodynamic inefficiencies that characterized human technology. Whatever drove the object's systems operated on principles that challenged fundamental assumptions about energy conservation and entropy. As Atlas settled into its carefully chosen orbit around Mars, approximately 25,000 kilometers above the planet's surface, it began deploying what appeared to be smaller objects. These secondary artifacts were too small to resolve clearly from Earth, but their presence was unmistakable as they established their own orbital patterns around Mars. The deployment sequence was elegant and purposeful, resembling the way human missions might release satellites or probes to conduct detailed planetary surveys. But the precision and coordination of Atlas's secondary objects suggested a level of technological sophistication that surpassed anything in humanity's current capabilities. Each small artifact took up a specific orbital position, creating what appeared to be a comprehensive observation network surrounding Mars. Dr. Rodriguez found herself at the center of an international effort to understand what Atlas was attempting to accomplish. Representatives from space agencies around the world convened emergency sessions, sharing data and theories about the visitor's intentions. The object's behavior suggested long-term presence rather than brief observation. Atlas had traveled 45,000 years to reach our solar system, and it appeared prepared to stay for an extended period. The psychological impact on humanity was profound. For the first time in our species' history, we were confronted with undeniable evidence that intelligence existed beyond Earth. The philosophical and religious implications sent shockwaves through communities around the world. What did Atlas's presence mean for our understanding of our place in the universe? Were we being studied, evaluated, welcomed, or warned? government agencies struggled to develop appropriate responses to humanity's first confirmed extraterrestrial visitor. Military officials wondered whether Atlas posed a threat, while scientists advocated for attempts at communication and peaceful contact. The visitor's advanced technology and mysterious intentions created a diplomatic challenge unlike anything in human history. Meanwhile, Atlas continued its patient observation of Mars, its sensors probing every aspect of the red planet's environment. The object's activities followed patterns that suggested a comprehensive survey mission, as if it were gathering data for some larger purpose that remained hidden from human understanding. The mystery of Atlas had evolved from astronomical curiosity to the most significant event in human history. As the dark visitor from another star system established its presence in our solar system, humanity found itself standing at the threshold of a new era, one in which we were no longer alone in the cosmic darkness. The weeks that followed Atlas's orbital insertion around Mars brought revelations that challenged every assumption humanity had made about first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. The visitor's behavior patterns were becoming increasingly complex, almost conversational in their rhythm. Atlas would focus its attention on specific regions of Mars for days at a time, conducting what appeared to be detailed examinations, then shift to entirely different areas with a purposefulness that suggested it was following some predetermined research protocol. Dr. Kim found herself working 18-hour days, coordinating observations from telescopes scattered across 6 continents. The international astronomical community had never collaborated so intensively, sharing data in real time as they struggled to understand what Atlas was doing in Martian orbit. The object's secondary artifacts had arranged themselves in a configuration that reminded some researchers of a neural network, each small probe positioned to provide overlapping coverage of the planet below. What troubled the scientists most was Atlas's apparent interest in humanity's robotic presence on Mars. The visitor's scans weren't random or comprehensive. They seemed to focus specifically on areas where human made objects were operating. Perseverance rover's daily activities were being monitored with particular attention, as if Atlas were studying not just Mars itself, but the way humans explored and interacted with alien worlds. The realization sent a quiet chill through mission control rooms around the world. Atlas wasn't simply conducting a geological survey, it was observing human behavior, learning about our methods, our technology, and perhaps even our intentions. The roles had reversed in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. Humanity, which had spent centuries studying the cosmos, had become the subject of study. Dr. Park's team made a breakthrough that added another layer of mystery to Atlas's mission. Analysis of the visitor's transmission patterns revealed what appeared to be learning algorithms at work. The object wasn't simply broadcasting predetermined messages. It was adapting its communications based on the responses it received from Earth, modifying signal strength, frequency patterns, and even the mathematical structures embedded in its transmissions. This adaptive behavior suggested something that kept Park awake at night, staring at her ceiling. Atlas wasn't just an automated probe following programmed instructions. There was something resembling consciousness at work, an intelligence that could observe, analyze, and adjust its behavior based on new information. Humanity wasn't just encountering alien technology, it was making contact with an alien mind. The ethical implications were staggering. If Atlas possessed some form of consciousness, then humanity's attempts to study and understand it raised profound questions about consent and communication. How does one establish diplomatic relations with an intelligence that operates on principles entirely foreign to human experience? What protocols exist for first contact when the visitor appears to be studying us as intently as we are studying it? Government agencies around the world found themselves grappling with scenarios that had never been seriously considered outside of science fiction. The visitor's advanced technology and apparent intelligence made it impossible to treat Atlas as simply another astronomical phenomenon. This was a potential ambassador from another civilization, one that had traveled farther than any human artifact would ever reach, carrying with it the accumulated knowledge of a species that had mastered interstellar travel. Yet Atlas remained enigmatically silent when it came to direct communication. Despite humanity's attempts to establish contact through radio transmissions, mathematical sequences, and even directed energy beams, the visitor continued its systematic observation without acknowledging any of Earth's overtures. It was as if Atlas were following some form of non interference protocol, studying humanity from a distance while avoiding direct interaction. The object's behavior reminded some researchers of the way human anthropologists might study an isolated culture, observing and documenting without making direct contact that might contaminate or influence the subjects of their research. The parallel was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Were humans the isolated culture in this scenario? Were we being studied as specimens of a primitive civilization that had barely managed to leave its home planet? As Atlas continued its patient surveillance of Mars, subtle changes began appearing in its orbital mechanics. The object wasn't maintaining a fixed position. Instead, it was gradually adjusting its altitude and inclination, positioning itself for what appeared to be an even closer examination of specific Martian surface features. These orbital modifications required precise calculations and energy expenditure, further evidence that Atlas possessed sophisticated propulsion systems that operated without detectable emissions. Dr. Chen's trajectory analysis revealed something that made the international space community hold its collective breath. Atlas's orbital adjustments were bringing it into alignment with Mars's orbital path around the Sun. The object was positioning itself to accompany the red planet on its year-long journey around our star, establishing what appeared to be a permanent presence in the Martian system. This wasn't a brief reconnaissance mission. Atlas had committed to an extended stay, perhaps indefinitely. The implications for humanity's own Mars exploration programs were profound. Every future mission to the red planet would have to account for the presence of an advanced alien intelligence already in orbit. The dynamics of space exploration had changed overnight. Meanwhile, on Earth, the discovery of Atlas was beginning to reshape human civilization in ways both subtle and profound. Religious leaders struggled to interpret the theological implications of confirmed extraterrestrial intelligence. Scientists found their research priorities suddenly reoriented toward understanding technologies and physics that challenged fundamental assumptions about what was possible. Engineers began dreaming of propulsion systems that could operate without detectable energy signatures, materials that could absorb electromagnetic radiation with perfect efficiency, and guidance systems that could navigate across interstellar distances with precision measured in kilometers. The psychological impact on individual humans was equally significant. Astronomers reported increased interest in their field from students and amateur stargazers who suddenly realized that the universe was far more populated than anyone had imagined. The night sky had transformed from a beautiful but empty canvas into a vast ocean that might harbor countless other intelligences, other civilizations, other visitors like Atlas, who might even now be making their way toward Earth. Dr. Rodriguez found herself appointed to head an international task force charged with developing protocols for ongoing observation of Atlas and preparation for possible future contact. The responsibility was overwhelming. Every decision her team made might influence humanity's relationship with its first confirmed extraterrestrial visitor. The wrong approach could close doors to communication that might never open again. The right approach might usher in a new era of cosmic citizenship for the human species. Atlas's presence had also triggered a renaissance in theoretical physics and engineering. Universities around the world were establishing new departments focused on what some called xenotechnology, the study of technologies based on non human principles. Graduate students who had expected to spend their careers studying familiar problems suddenly found themselves at the forefront of disciplines that didn't exist a few months earlier. The economic implications were equally far reaching. Stock markets fluctuated wildly as investors tried to anticipate which industries might benefit from eventual access to alien technology. Defense contractors found themselves reconsidering the nature of national security in a universe where advanced civilizations could apparently arrive at any solar system with minimal warning. Energy companies wondered if their entire business model might become obsolete if humanity could ever understand Atlas's apparently limitless power source. Yet, through all the excitement and speculation and apprehension, Atlas continued its methodical work. The object maintained its orbit around Mars with mechanical precision, its sensors sweeping across the planet's surface in patterns that suggested a comprehensive mapping project. Whatever Atlas was looking for, it was conducting its search with the patience of intelligence that thought in geological timescales rather than human lifespans. The visitor's systematic approach to planetary observation was beginning to yield insights into Mars's history that complemented and sometimes contradicted humanity's own research. Atlas seemed particularly interested in subsurface formations that human rovers and orbiters had only glimpsed. The object's sensors could apparently penetrate deep into the Martian crust, revealing geological structures and possible water reserves that had remained hidden from human instruments. This superior sensing capability raised tantalizing possibilities for future collaboration. If humanity could ever establish meaningful communication with Atlas, the visitor's advanced sensors could revolutionize our understanding of planetary science. The object had already observed Mars in ways that human technology couldn't match. What secrets might it reveal about Earth, about the other planets in our solar system, about the countless worlds orbiting distant stars? But such speculation remained firmly in the realm of possibility rather than probability. Atlas showed no inclination toward sharing its discoveries or engaging in the kind of scientific exchange that human researchers desperately hoped for. The visitor remained focused on its own agenda, following research priorities that remained opaque to human observation. As the months passed, and Atlas established itself as a permanent resident of Martian space, humanity began to adapt to the reality of sharing its solar system with an intelligence from another star. The initial shock and excitement evolved into a kind of watchful coexistence. Atlas continued its work while humans continued theirs, two species of explorers operating in the same cosmic neighborhood while maintaining a respectful distance from each other. The visitor had become part of the solar system's inventory, as familiar and yet as mysterious as any natural satellite. Children growing up in this new era would never know a universe where humans were alone. They would inherit a cosmos where intelligence was scattered among the stars, where visitors from distant worlds might arrive at any time, carrying with them technologies and perspectives that could reshape civilization overnight. And still, Atlas worked, patient and methodical, gathering data about Mars and perhaps about humanity itself, preparing for purposes that remained hidden behind the dark surface of an object that had traveled 45,000 years of the galaxy. To reach our small corner, the data Atlas was collecting began to paint a picture that no human scientist had anticipated. Deep within the visitor's sophisticated sensor arrays, information was being processed and cross referenced against databases that contained the accumulated knowledge of a civilization that had been exploring the galaxy while humanity was still learning to make fire. Every measurement, every scan, every subtle variation in Mars's magnetic field was being compared to patterns observed on thousands of other worlds across hundreds of different star systems. Dr. Harrison's team made a discovery that sent quiet tremors through the scientific community. The isotopic signatures they had detected in Atlas's hull weren't just exotic, they were impossible according to current stellar nucleosynthesis models. The materials composing the visitor's structure contained elements that could only be created under conditions that didn't exist in any known natural environment. Atlas wasn't simply built from alien materials. It was constructed from substances that had been deliberately manufactured using technologies that could manipulate matter at the subatomic level. This revelation transformed the entire framework for understanding what Atlas represented. The object wasn't just evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence. It was proof of a civilization that had achieved mastery over the fundamental forces of nature, one that could create materials with properties that human science was only beginning to theorize about. The implications for physics, chemistry, and engineering were staggering. Meanwhile, the visitor's behavioral patterns were evolving in ways that suggested increasing familiarity with its new environment. Atlas had begun making subtle adjustments to its observation schedule, focusing more intensively on regions of Mars where seasonal changes were most pronounced. The object seemed particularly fascinated by the planet's polar ice caps, watching with electronic patience as carbon dioxide snow sublimated into the thin atmosphere with the changing seasons. These observations weren't random curiosity. Atlas was studying Mars's climate systems with the thoroughness of a researcher preparing a comprehensive report. Every dust storm was tracked from formation to dissipation. Every temperature variation was measured and recorded. The visitor was building a complete picture of Martian weather patterns, perhaps comparing them to similar phenomena observed on other worlds throughout the galaxy. Dr. Kim found herself wondering if Atlas had encountered planets like Mars before. The object's research methodology suggested familiarity with the types of atmospheric and geological processes that characterized worlds in the habitable zone around their parent stars. Atlas knew what to look for because it had seen it before on other planets orbiting other suns in other corners of the galaxy. The thought was both thrilling and humbling. Atlas represented not just first contact with alien intelligence, but contact with a civilization that had been exploring the cosmos while humans were still confined to a single world. The visitor carried within its memory banks the observations of countless expeditions to countless worlds, a library of planetary science that dwarfed humanity's accumulated knowledge. Yet Atlas remained maddeningly silent when it came to sharing any of this information. The object continued its systematic observations without offering any insights into what it was discovering or how its findings compared to data from other worlds. It was as if humanity were watching a master scientist at work while being unable to read the research notes or understand the conclusions being drawn. The visitor's secondary artifacts had begun exhibiting their own peculiar behaviors. These smaller objects, each no larger than a conventional satellite, were demonstrating a level of coordination that suggested some form of distributed intelligence. They moved in response to each other's positions, adjusting their orbits to maintain optimal coverage of Mars's surface while avoiding any interference with their companions' observations. Dr. Park's xenobiology team made an observation that added another layer of mystery to Atlas's mission. The visitor's scanning patterns showed a marked preference for regions where Mars's ancient magnetic field had been strongest. These areas, where the planet's now dormant magnetosphere had once provided protection from solar radiation, were precisely the locations where life would have had the best chance of surviving during Mars's transition from a warm, wet world to the cold desert it had become. Atlas was searching for traces of ancient Martian life. The realization hit the scientific community like a gentle but profound earthquake. The visitor wasn't simply conducting a geological survey or studying planetary evolution. It was looking for evidence that Mars had once harbored living organisms, perhaps even complex ecosystems that had thrived billions of years ago when the planet's climate was more hospitable. This focused search for biological signatures suggested that Atlas's creators understood the principles of astrobiology with the same sophistication they had demonstrated in their mastery of physics and engineering. The visitor knew where to look for life because it had found life before on other worlds under similar conditions. Atlas was following a proven methodology for detecting biological activity on planets that had undergone climate catastrophes. The implications for Earth were impossible to ignore. If Atlas was indeed searching for signs of life on Mars, it had undoubtedly already conducted similar observations of our own planet. The visitor had passed through the inner solar system on its approach to Mars, close enough to Earth to gather detailed information about our atmosphere, our biosphere, and perhaps even our technological civilization. What conclusions had Atlas drawn about humanity? Did the visitor's creators consider Earth's inhabitants to be a promising young species worthy of further study, or merely another example of biological activity on a planet that would eventually face its own climate challenges? The questions multiplied faster than answers could be found, each observation of Atlas raising new possibilities about humanity's place in a universe that was clearly far more populated than anyone had imagined. Dr. Chen's orbital mechanics team detected subtle changes in Atlas's trajectory that suggested the visitor was preparing for the next phase of its mission. The object was gradually adjusting its orbit to align with Mars's path around the Sun, but these modifications went beyond simple orbital mechanics. Atlas was positioning itself for what appeared to be a departure from the Martian system, though when and where it might be headed remained completely unknown. The possibility that Atlas might be preparing to leave sent waves of concern through the international scientific community. Humanity's first confirmed extraterrestrial visitor had provided tantalizing glimpses of technologies and capabilities that could revolutionize human civilization, but it had shared none of its secrets. If Atlas departed as mysteriously as it had arrived, the opportunity to learn from an advanced alien intelligence might be lost forever. Desperate attempts at communication intensified as the signs of Atlas's potential departure became more apparent. Radio telescopes transmitted increasingly sophisticated mathematical sequences toward the visitor, while laser communication systems beamed precisely calibrated light pulses in patterns designed to demonstrate human intelligence and peaceful intentions. Every signal went unanswered, every attempt at contact met with the same enigmatic silence that had characterized Atlas's behavior since its arrival. The visitor's apparent indifference to human overtures was perhaps more unsettling than any hostile response would have been. Atlas seemed to regard humanity with the same detached scientific interest that human researchers might show toward an interesting but ultimately insignificant species encountered during a field study. The comparison was deeply uncomfortable for a species that had grown accustomed to seeing itself as the pinnacle of intelligence in the known universe. Yet, even as Atlas maintained its scientific distance, the visitor continued to provide unprecedented insights into Mars's hidden history. The object's deep penetrating sensors had mapped subsurface water reserves that human missions had never detected, revealing vast aquifers trapped beneath layers of permafrost and rock. These discoveries suggested that Mars might harbor far more water than previously estimated, perhaps even enough to support future human colonization efforts. More intriguingly, Atlas had identified geological formations that appeared to preserve evidence of ancient hydrothermal activity. These underground hot springs, now cold and dormant, represented exactly the kind of environment where primitive life might have originated and possibly even survived Mars's climatic transformation. If microbial life still existed in these deep, protected environments, Atlas's sensors might be sophisticated enough to detect it. The visitor's systematic mapping of these potentially life-bearing environments created an ethical dilemma for human Mars exploration programs. If Atlas had indeed located sites where Martian life might still exist, did humanity have the right to investigate these areas with rovers and landers that might contaminate or destroy whatever organisms had survived for billions of years in the planet's depths? The question highlighted one of the fundamental challenges posed by Atlas's presence. The visitor clearly possessed far more advanced scientific capabilities than anything humanity had developed, but it showed no inclination to share its discoveries or coordinate its research with human efforts. Atlas operated according to its own agenda and ethical framework, one that might or might not align with human values and priorities. As the months passed and Atlas continued its methodical work, patterns began emerging that suggested the visitor was nearing the completion of its Martian survey. The object's scanning sequences were becoming more repetitive, as if it were conducting final verification sweeps to confirm earlier observations. The secondary artifacts had begun consolidating their positions, moving into formations that resembled a departure configuration. Dr. Rodriguez found herself leading increasingly urgent discussions about humanity's response to Atlas's eventual departure. Should human missions attempt to follow the visitor to its next destination? Could Earth's space agencies develop the technology necessary to track an object that could apparently travel between star systems? What protocols should govern humanity's future encounters with interstellar visitors? The questions were both practical and philosophical, touching on fundamental issues about humanity's role in a universe that clearly harbored multiple intelligent civilizations. Atlas had demonstrated that interstellar travel was not only possible, but apparently routine for sufficiently advanced species. The visitor's casual arrival and methodical survey of our solar system suggested that such expeditions were standard practice for civilizations that had mastered the technologies necessary to cross the vast distances between stars. This revelation forced humanity to confront uncomfortable truths about our own technological limitations and cosmic isolation. While Atlas could apparently travel 45,000 years between star systems with the same ease that human spacecraft traveled between planets, our own species remained confined to a single solar system, dependent on chemical rockets that could barely escape Earth's gravitational well. The technological gulf between humanity and Atlas's creators was so vast that meaningful communication might be impossible even if the visitor were inclined to respond to human overtures. The difference in capabilities was comparable to the gap between human civilization and the bacterial colonies that lived in Earth's deepest ocean trenches, organisms that remained completely unaware of the complex technological society existing far above their heads. Yet, despite this humbling comparison, Atlas's presence had already begun to transform human civilization in profound ways. The visitor's demonstration of advanced technologies had accelerated research programs in fields ranging from materials science to theoretical physics. Universities were establishing new interdisciplinary programs focused on understanding the principles that might underlie interstellar travel and the manipulation of matter at the subatomic level. The psychological impact was equally significant. Humanity's first confirmed encounter with extraterrestrial intelligence had shattered the comfortable assumption that our species represented the pinnacle of cosmic evolution. The universe was clearly populated with civilizations far more advanced than our own, civilizations that possessed technologies and capabilities that seemed almost magical from a human perspective. This realization had triggered both excitement and anxiety throughout human society. Some saw Atlas's arrival as proof that humanity was not alone in the universe, and that contact with advanced civilizations might usher in a new golden age of scientific and technological progress. Others worried about the implications of being observed by intelligences whose capabilities and intentions remained completely unknown. As Atlas continued its patient work in Martian orbit, these competing perspectives shaped humanity's response to its first interstellar visitor, creating a complex mixture of wonder, hope, and apprehension that would influence our species' approach to cosmic exploration for generations to come. The visitor's methodical survey of Mars was approaching what appeared to be a critical juncture. Atlas had spent months mapping every canyon, crater, and geological formation on the red planet's surface, but now its attention was turning to something far more specific. The object's sensors were focusing with laser like precision on a series of underground caverns located beneath the Valles Marineris canyon system, chambers that human instruments had barely detected, but that Atlas was examining with the intensity of a researcher who had finally found what they were looking for. Dr. Kim noticed the shift first during one of her routine analysis sessions in the pre dawn hours when the laboratory was quiet and the data streams from observatories around the world painted their electronic stories across her computer screens. Atlas's scanning patterns had changed dramatically overnight, abandoning the broad systematic sweeps that had characterized its previous months of observation in favor of concentrated, high resolution examinations of specific subsurface locations. The intensity of these focused scans was unlike anything the visitor had demonstrated before. Power signatures emanating from Atlas suggested that the object was channeling enormous amounts of energy into its sensor arrays, pushing them to their maximum capabilities in order to penetrate deeper into Mars's crust than ever before. Whatever lay hidden in those underground chambers was important enough to warrant the visitor's full attention and considerable technological resources. Dr. Park's xenobiology team was called in to analyze the geological characteristics of the regions Atlas was examining so intently. What they discovered sent quiet ripples of excitement through the scientific community. The targeted areas showed clear evidence of ancient hydrothermal activity, with mineral deposits and rock formations that indicated the presence of hot springs and geothermal vents that had remained active for millions of years after Mars's surface had frozen into its current desert state. These underground environments represented exactly the kind of protected, energy rich habitats where primitive life forms might have survived the planet's climatic transformation. If Martian organisms had managed to adapt to the planet's changing conditions, these deep cavern systems would have provided the perfect refuge from the harsh surface environment that had claimed the planet's more exposed ecosystems. Atlas's intense focus on these locations suggested that the visitor's sensors were detecting something significant within the caverns. The object's scanning sequences showed the methodical patterns of a researcher conducting detailed biological surveys, measuring temperature gradients, chemical compositions, and electromagnetic signatures that might indicate the presence of living organisms or their fossilized remains. The implications were staggering. If Atlas had indeed located evidence of Martian life, whether extinct or still surviving, It would represent one of the most profound discoveries in the history of science. The visitors' advanced sensors were apparently capable of detecting biological signatures that remained invisible to human instruments, providing a level of resolution and sensitivity that could revolutionize our understanding of astrobiology and the distribution of life throughout the universe. Dr. Harrison's materials analysis team made another breakthrough that added to the mounting evidence of Atlas's sophisticated capabilities. Detailed examination of the visitor's electromagnetic emissions revealed that the object was using scanning technologies based on principles that human science had never encountered. Though energy patterns suggested manipulation of quantum fields in ways that allowed Atlas to peer through solid rock as if it were transparent, mapping internal structures with precision measured in centimeters rather than kilometers. This quantum based sensing technology represented a level of scientific achievement that placed Atlas's creators centuries ahead of human capabilities. The ability to map subsurface structures with such extraordinary detail suggested mastery over fundamental physical forces that humanity was only beginning to understand in theoretical terms. Meanwhile, the visitors' secondary artifacts were exhibiting new behaviors that indicated coordination with Atlas's intensive scanning operations. These smaller objects had repositioned themselves in precise orbital configurations that maximized their ability to receive and process data from their parent craft's deep penetrating sensors. The entire system was working in perfect harmony, like a distributed scientific instrument of incredible sophistication. The international scientific community found itself in the unprecedented position of watching advanced alien technology conduct research that far exceeded human capabilities. Every observation Atlas made was potentially revolutionary, but the visitor remained as silent and uncommunicative as ever. Humanity could observe the research being conducted, but had no access to the results or conclusions being drawn from that research. Dr. Rodriguez's task force was struggling with questions that had never before confronted human civilization. If Atlas discovered evidence of Martian life, what obligations did humanity have to protect those organisms from contamination by future Mars missions? Could Earth's space agencies justify sending rovers and landers to areas that an advanced alien intelligence was clearly marking as biologically significant? The ethical dimensions of the situation were complicated by Atlas's apparent indifference to human concerns. The visitor showed no interest in coordinating its research with human efforts or sharing information that might help guide responsible exploration policies. Atlas operated according to its own scientific protocols and ethical framework, which might not align with human values regarding planetary protection and the preservation of potential alien ecosystems. Government agencies around the world were quietly convening emergency sessions to discuss the implications of Atlas's discoveries for national space policies and international cooperation agreements. The visitor's presence had transformed Mars from a target for human exploration into an active research site being investigated by a far more advanced civilization. Every future mission to the Red Planet would have to account for the possibility that Atlas had identified locations of extraordinary biological significance. The psychological impact on the scientific community was profound. Researchers who had dedicated their careers to searching for signs of ancient or existing Martian life found themselves in the surreal position of watching that search being conducted by alien technology that far exceeded anything humans had ever developed. It was both thrilling and deeply humbling to witness science being practiced at a level that represented the pinnacle of what intelligent beings might achieve. Atlas's intensive scanning operations continued for weeks, with the visitor's sensors probing deeper into the Martian subsurface with each passing day. The object's power expenditure remained enormous, suggesting that whatever it was attempting to detect required extraordinary sensitivity and resolution. The visitor was pushing its already impressive capabilities to their absolute limits in pursuit of information that remained tantalizingly out of reach for human observers. Dr. Chen's orbital mechanics team detected subtle changes in Atlas's position that indicated the visitor was preparing for a significant shift in its operational status. The object was gradually adjusting its orbit to a higher altitude, positioning itself for what appeared to be a transition from intensive local scanning to broader surveillance operations. These orbital modifications suggested that Atlas's detailed examination of the Martian subsurface was approaching completion. The possibility that Atlas might have concluded its research and be preparing for departure created a sense of urgency throughout the international scientific community. If the visitor left Mars carrying the secrets it had discovered in the planet's underground chambers, humanity might lose forever the opportunity to learn whether life had ever existed on our neighboring world. Desperate attempts at communication with Atlas intensified as signs of the visitor's potential departure became more apparent. Radio observatories transmitted increasingly sophisticated signals toward the object, while particle accelerators were reconfigured to generate precisely modulated neutrino beams that might penetrate the visitor's apparent electromagnetic shielding. Every attempt met with the same enigmatic silence that had characterized Atlas's response to human overtures since its arrival. The visitor's indifference to human communication attempts was becoming a source of frustration and concern for researchers who had hoped that shared scientific interests might provide a foundation for meaningful contact. Atlas clearly possessed information about Mars that could revolutionize human understanding of planetary evolution and astrobiology, but the visitor showed no inclination to share any of its discoveries with the primitive civilization observing from the third planet. Yet, even as Atlas maintained its scientific isolation, the visitor's presence was continuing to transform human civilization in unexpected ways. The object's demonstration of advanced scanning technologies had inspired new approaches to medical imaging, geological surveying, and materials analysis. Engineers around the world were attempting to replicate the principles underlying Atlas's quantum based sensors, though success remained decades or perhaps centuries in the future. The visitor's systematic approach to planetary exploration was also influencing human mission planning for future Mars expeditions. Atlas had demonstrated the value of comprehensive, long term observation programs that prioritized detailed subsurface analysis over surface mobility. Human mission planners were beginning to incorporate these lessons into designs for next generation Mars orbiters and landers. As Atlas continued its methodical work, now focused on what appeared to be verification and confirmation of earlier discoveries, Patterns emerged that suggested the visitor was operating according to established protocols developed through extensive experience with planetary surveys. The object's research methodology showed the refined efficiency of a civilization that had conducted similar investigations on countless worlds throughout the galaxy. This realization forced humanity to confront the likelihood that Atlas represented not an isolated explorer, but part of a vast network of interstellar research missions conducted by a civilization that routinely surveyed potentially habitable worlds. The visitor's casual approach to crossing interstellar distances and conducting comprehensive planetary analyses suggested that such expeditions were standard practice for sufficiently advanced species. The thought that humanity's solar system was being cataloged and studied as part of some larger galactic survey project was both fascinating and unsettling. It placed Earth and its inhabitants in the position of subjects rather than observers, specimens in a cosmic laboratory rather than scientists conducting their own research. The reversal of roles was psychologically challenging for a species that had grown accustomed to seeing itself as the active agent in scientific discovery. Dr. Kim found herself wondering what conclusions Atlas might be drawing about humanity based on its observations of our Mars exploration efforts. Did the visitor's creators consider human technology primitive and inefficient, or were they impressed by our species' determination to explore beyond our home planet, despite significant technological limitations? The questions multiplied endlessly, each one highlighting the vast gulf in capabilities between humanity and the civilization that had dispatched Atlas on its interstellar mission. And so, as we reach the end of our quiet journey into the mystery of Atlas, we find ourselves changed by what we've witnessed. This dark visitor from the stars has shown us that we are not alone, that intelligence flows through the cosmos like starlight itself. Whether Atlas departs tomorrow or lingers for decades, it has already given us the greatest gift of all: the knowledge that somewhere among distant suns, other minds ponder the same questions that keep us awake at night, staring up at the infinite darkness and wondering what wonders await discovery.